Out of the shadows comes the best of indie podcasts. I'm Jordan, and you're listening to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+.
I'm Ted.
I'm JJ.
And we're here to tell you about our show, Conspiring to Argue.
I like it.
That is not relevant. What do we do on the show?
Well, on our podcast, what we do is take conspiracy theories, and either Ted or myself will argue about if the conspiracy is real or not.
Yep. And sometimes the conspiracies are silly. Sometimes they're, in the pantheon of the greatest conspiracies of all time. It's a mixed bag.
Sometimes they're about aliens.
So check us out wherever you listen to podcasts.
Sometimes they're about murder.
Conspiring to Argue.
Hey, this is a true crime show where someone uses curse words. Oh, it must be me. Listener discretion is advised. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors, and welcome to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ. You know how I recently said I probably wouldn't be going to any more true crime festivals for a while? Well, guess what? I decided to go to the one in Portland, Oregon at the end of August. It's called the True Crime Fest Northwest. What a catchy name! And it's only 4 hours away from where I live. It's being sponsored by Murder in the Rain podcast, and I just love them. One of the hosts of Murder in the Rain is Alicia Holland, and it's her mom who's the one that's putting it on. So I'm kind of excited about it. I have the kids set to pup sit for Jack for me, and I'm going alone. Yes! Should you be interested in attending? Use promo code RAINBOW10 for 10% off your tickets. It'll be at the Sheraton near the Portland Airport. I remember the Seattle one I went to for the Pacific Northwest Crime Fest, and I met so many awesome people. There were a lot of listeners that showed up, and it was great. I sure hope the turnout for this one will be as good too. I'll put a link to it in my show notes. There's good news coming out of Michigan. The state has left the dark ages, and they're now outlawing the gay and trans panic defenses. Yay! And welcome to 2024, Michigan. Looks like that now makes 32 states that have banned the gay trans panic defense. And these states are no longer victim blaming. Only 18 more to go, and all 50 states will be up to speed. Come on, Kamala. Win this thing and let America put an end to cavemanning. And more good news from northern Greece. A 17-year-old was arrested for verbally attacking a 21-year-old with homophobic slurs. The Coast Guard at the Port of Kavala said, "Nuh-uh-uh, that shit don't fly with us." And they took the 17-year-old into custody. Now that's how bullying should be handled everywhere. This episode, I have 3 older, colder cases for you. All of them are out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and they all occurred within months of each other. But most likely they all had different killers in each case. But since they're all cold cases, we just don't know who the real killer is in any of the cases. One very important thing that we need to remember about the years that these cases occurred in is that the state of Utah has always been pretty religiously conservative, with a huge amount of the strict Mormon population living there. In the 1970s, when these crimes happened, it was even harder to be an LGBTQ person in that state. 2, if you were born gay into a Mormon family, you had the fear that your family would not protect you. And 3, because of the strong religious beliefs, if you were LGBTQ, you'd be ostracized or shunned. And not just from your church, but from your whole community. And I don't mean the LGBTQ community. I mean the community you lived in. There are actually a whole lot of other reasons, but it's mostly because the hate for the LGBTQ was dangerous and deadly. Today, though, it looks like several members of the city council in Salt Lake are members of the LGBTQ as well. And that is huge. Even the Mormon Church has been making baby steps in accepting the LGBTQ plus more. This first case that I'd like to cover is from 1978. Many of my resources for the 3 stories came from the Utah Investigative Journalism Project and from the University of Utah's cold case classes that were investigating unsolved murders in their state. Truthfully, I'm a little surprised they chose 3 LGBTQ cases to study, but I'm impressed. Douglas Ray Coleman, Doug as he became known, was born December 1st, 1951, to Merle and Robert Coleman in Ogden, Utah. This would have made Doug a Sagittarius. At the age of 26, Doug was now living in Salt Lake City. He had some mental health challenges, battling a paranoid schizophrenia disorder, but for the most part, Doug was shy, quiet, and artistic. He'd won several awards at a Utah County fair for his oil paintings, and I believe that art therapy is one of the best of all therapies. It might not cure schizophrenia, but it sure can calm down a soul. Doug's brother Dennis had said that Doug was just a normal kid from a normal family, and he just happened to have a disease. Now, Dennis was referring to the mental disorder, not that his brother was gay. Doug worked as a produce manager at a Safeway grocery store in Brigham City, Utah, and he would also work at a pizza place in downtown Salt Lake City. He lived with a male roommate who was a co-worker at the pizza joint and his roommate's girlfriend. They had a 62-year-old retired neighbor named Bruce Hughes. Now, I'm only sharing that with you because Bruce would eventually become the prime suspect in Doug's murder. Doug was not flamboyant or particularly feminine in appearance. He mostly kept to himself, but he would drop into a gay bar now and again. His favorite gay bar was the Sun Trap, which was the very first gay bar in Salt Lake City. This is where Doug was last seen alive on November 30th, 1978. At some point, he left the bar and he proceeded to walk home. That same night, his deceased body was found in an empty boxcar on some railroad tracks, and the tracks were not far from the city's Union Pacific Rail Depot. Doug had been shot twice, once in his head and once in his chest. Shell casings from a .22 caliber gun were found near his body. Doug's neighbor Bruce was a huge gun enthusiast, but shortly after Doug's murder, he pawned off almost all of his guns. Bruce also had a fascination, no, it was more of an obsession with Doug's female roommate. There was one day that the woman roomie was complaining to Bruce about something that Doug had said or something that he did that upset her. Bruce then told the woman that he would kill Doug for angering her, and he would make it look like a robbery. Investigators decided to start by looking for the murder weapon that killed Doug. They had 2 casings and they started at pawn shops. At one of the shops, they found a .22 pistol that their ballistic team tested. The ballistic team was positive it was the murder weapon. Finding out that that gun was formerly owned by Bruce, police quickly paid him a visit, and they were mildly surprised to see that Bruce lived next door to the victim. As well, they learned that Bruce used to work at the rail yard where Doug's body was discovered. Now, to me, that sure does sound like an awful lot of coincidences. But apparently it didn't bother the police at all. They only ended up speaking to Bruce once. And their biggest question for him was, how can you explain the fact that your gun is the same gun that killed Doug? Bruce's response was, oh gee, I had no explanation for it. Oh gee, Bruce, golly shucks, really? But the detectives? They claimed that they weren't really sure it was the same gun used to kill Doug, in spite of ballistic expert certainty. in spite of a witness at the rail yard describing a man that looked very similar to Bruce, including describing a jacket that the man was wearing, that Bruce's neighbors could confirm that they've seen Bruce in this very same jacket many times before. Those detectives were so lame. And then they let Bruce go back to his home and to his life without ever looking at him again. Doug's case became cold. Had Salt Lake City law enforcement actually put some effort into this case, it surely could have been solved in 1978. But since they didn't, in 2014, the Salt Lake Police Force then reviewed the case. Once again. And then they quietly labeled the case exceptionally cleared. And they did this in a city budget document. According to them, that label meant that the suspect could not be prosecuted because he died and because of a statute of limitations. Oh my, how convenient. There was actually another suspect named Perry Stanger that the police also looked at. Doug had met Perry at a mental facility. Doug had even stayed with Perry on occasion. Perry left Salt Lake City the day of Doug's murder. He moved back a few weeks later. And when the police interviewed him, Perry was elusive and vague about the killing. He warned the detectives if they arrested him, the biggest drought in history would befall upon them. They would never see snow or rain again. Personally, I think that sounds like his mental health issues talking. Detectives spoke to Perry's mother, who told him that Perry thought the Spirit of God was in him, and that when Perry got violent, he believed he was doing God's work. His own mother said it was possible for her son to have killed Doug, except that he had no access to a gun. Police took what they had on Perry to the district attorney, and the district attorney didn't find it was enough for a conviction, especially since it appeared Bruce owned the murder weapon. And that's why Doug's case will remain forever an unsolved cold case. Who do you think looks good for Doug's murder? My money would have been on Bruce. Rest in power, Doug. That same year and same month, on November 6, 1978, just before Doug's murder, an LGBTQ rights activist named Anthony Adams was found stabbed, and not just once, but multiple times in his apartment by some colleagues and friends of a socialist congressional campaign that he was working on. Anthony, a black gay man, was supposed to be the rally for the campaign that weekend, but when he didn't show up, his colleagues went looking for him. They found his naked body lying in a pool of his own blood next to the